But I also know that I learn best when I'm having fun. And we build our relationships between us whenever we're having fun. And that's part of what this is about. I'm kind of hoping that some of the things I say challenge you, because that's what my work is about. It's about building improbable relationships, quite often through challenging people's understandings of each other. So if I challenge you, I'm very happy. If I insult you or offend you, I'm not happy. And I don't want you to forgive me. If I say something that you disagree with, or that fundamentally runs against your beliefs or your values, don't forgive me. You're all very nice people, and there'll be a tendency to say, sure, he didn't know. Just let him go. Well, don't. I don't want that fool's pardon or that forgiveness. I want you to tell me how I have offended you, and then I will ask you for your forgiveness. Okay, so I want to call this talk Changing Perspectives, because that's what a lot of my work over the last 35 years has been. It's about changing people's perspectives of each other. It's about creating opportunities for them to get to know each other and to get to understand each other and to be understood. I've worked in many, many contexts, but maybe the best place for me to start is back where I was born. We've got a few Northerners here. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to say that people from the North are also people from Northern Ireland. Terminology is a terribly important thing when you're a leader in the area of peace building. If I called Northern Ireland the North or the North of Ireland, there are certain people I will offend. I'll offend the people who want to call Northern Ireland Northern Ireland. So therefore, I'm going to call it the North and Northern Ireland. You can take your pick, whichever you wish. My first experience of leadership was in Northern Ireland, or the North of Ireland, whenever I was about 16. Whenever I was 16, I was a member of the Boys' Brigade. The Boys' Brigade was a Christian uniformed organization attached to the church. I learned many things there, particularly about discipline. But it was quite interesting because on one hand, I was in the Boys' Brigade in the church, but I also got another leadership position in my community from the paramilitaries. I was, at 16, the leader of the youth wing of the Ulster Defence Association, which is a paramilitary group that dislikes Catholics. That's probably an underestimation. I think they probably had a deep hatred for Catholics. I was in there. And at 16, I was on the Ulster Workers' Strike barricades, and I was stopping Catholics going to work. Because for some odd reason, we wanted to prove to the Catholics that we were Protestants, and that identity was extremely important to us. Let's think about identity. Because identity, it's not really that important to us at the end of the day. I don't care whether you're Palestinian, whether you're Indian, whether you're Irish, Northern Irish, British, where else? Danish. But you don't wake up every morning and say, hey, it's great to be Palestinian, or it's great to be Danish. I don't wake up and say, hey, it's great to be a Protestant from Northern Ireland. I don't do that. None of us do that. So our identity is not really that important to us until you think someone's trying to take it away from you. The problem is that in my home, we would often have conversations because one of my brothers was in the British Army. My father was a member of the RUC. Another brother was a prison officer. And more recently, my eldest brother became an elected member of a local council for the Democratic Unionist Party, which is probably the strongest Protestant party in the north of Ireland. So I'm coming from that kind of background, and over dinner quite often we would talk about the Catholics in the street, because we came from a very humble, I come from a very humble background. My father was a painter and decorator. We had a little 2-up, 2-down house. The Catholics used to complain that they had to walk down the yard to go to the toilet. So did we. We had the same conditions. But one of the things that we used to do to try to keep ourselves above them was to put them down. We used to say Catholics were lazy. Catholics didn't want to work. Actually, they were quite dirty too. They kept coal in the bath. I don't know where that came from, but they kept coal in the bath. So we were taught all of this. And yet, whenever I was on the barricades as the young leader of the UDA, whenever I was on the barricades, my mother was disgraced. Even though we would talk about how better we were than the Catholics around us, she was embarrassed and she was worried because she knew if I stayed on that trajectory that I would end up in prison. And I'm so grateful for what she did. She came up to the barricade where all of us tough guys were, and we were stopping people going to work and breaking their car windows. And she came up to the barricade and she said, "Come here, get into the car. None of my sons are going to do this." So here we are, I'm the leader. And my mother has just humiliated me in front of all of the hard men. And so I looked at her, and it was a really important turning point, because I think we all have turning points. We all learn and we all develop. Sometimes that development takes years. Sometimes it takes us years to learn one lesson. At this point, though, everything fell into place for me. I said, "Mother, that's it. I'm not a Protestant. I'm not a Catholic. I've had my fill with this stuff." That was a really important turning point for me, because the next year, I became a leader in a different capacity. I became a leader in the youth fellowship of the Church of Ireland Church in Newtownards. And one of the possibilities that came to me as a young youth leader at 17 was to take my youth club to a residential centre for an encounter not unlike this one, actually, but much smaller. I brought 12 or 15 young people from my club, and we went with 12 or 15 young people from Catholic West Belfast. Yeah, good so far. I was there on Wednesday too. They let me in, and I didn't even need a visa. So we went away to a place called Glebe House, and the most magical thing happened to me at Glebe House. I'm a little Protestant, through and through, trying to change. And I met a girl there, and she was from Dublin. And I fell in love with her. I did, really. And she was a Catholic from Dublin. So this became a major problem. Because on one hand, my mother didn't want me on the barricades doing bad things, but she certainly didn't want me to marry a Catholic. That was going too far the other way. So anyway, eventually, after about 5 years of me chasing her, which was the truth, I mean, I chased her through university, and we both did the same course, we decided to get married. And actually, can I come back here every year? I really like this. This is really good. So we decided to get married. We had 4 children, and we got married in 1981, which is a very interesting year, because 1981 was the year of the hunger strikes. Most of you may not have been born during 1981, but it was a difficult time. We had a lot of people who were dying, a lot of people who were crying, a lot of people who were fearful of what was going to happen. Were we going to break out into a whole civil war? And of course, I get married in Dublin, in my wife's Catholic church, so my family say, "We're not going," because we're not really keen on it. 3 or 4 of them came. One brother was remarkably brave. He came. And so anyway, I just wanted to give you that little bit of story, because I think it's important, because it kind of set me on a trajectory, because I needed to know, how do you live with a Catholic? Really. I've been taught all of the negative things, and better than that, I have 4 sons who have all been baptized Catholic. I'm now in a minority. I'm the only Protestant in our house. So you need strength. And I think one of the qualities of a leader is the ability and the courage to swim against the tide whenever you know the tide is going the wrong direction. So I got into the area of peace building whenever I was a youth worker in East Belfast in the late 1970s and early 1980s. I used to bring young people from Protestant East Belfast to Divis Flats, which is the Catholic West Belfast. And we used to organise for them to meet. That's where my leadership and peace building work started. And I didn't know really what I was doing, but I knew it was a good thing. And somebody told me later what I was doing and what my whole life has been about. It has been about building improbable relationships. But in the year 2000, I was invited by the Palestinian ambassador to Ireland to get engaged in some work between Israel and Palestine. All of my previous 20 years, I had been committed to building peace between Protestants and Catholics. So the ambassador, he said, I want you to build some peace between Israel and Palestine, and I want you to particularly work with our members of parliament in the Knesset and in the PLC, the Palestinian Legislative Council. I've been in both places many, many times now, and that's a great honor because I consider myself fortunate that every day I work, I learn. It's a lifelong learning experience. But he said to me, I'd like you to build some of those improbable relationships between Palestine and Israel. And I said, that's fine. Who are the Protestants and who are the Catholics? He said, it doesn't work that way. He said, they're all Muslim and Jewish. And I said, well, are they Protestant Muslims or Catholic Muslims? But I went there and I learned so much. You know, I believe that everybody is a good person. Everybody is a good person. The guys who pulled the triggers for the British Army, the IRA, the UVF, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, good people. But good people are always capable of doing bad things. But let's not demonize the person because their circumstances have created a scenario where they have done bad things. At the age of 16, I was really, really lucky. My mother took me off the barricade. I could have been one of them. So although I'm not religious anymore, I often use this quote. But for the grace of God, or Allah, there go I. In 1994, the context changes in Ireland. Nothing remains the same anywhere. Everything is constantly changing. That's a real challenge for a leader. It's a real challenge for a leader because you need to create the change, but you also need to understand the change. You need to understand what's happening around you if you're going to play a meaningful role. In 1994, our main paramilitary groups, I don't use the word terrorist, folks. The word terrorist is not in my vocabulary. Well, it is now because I'm saying it. It's not a helpful word. In my job, it's not a helpful word. I know governments who are terrorists. They're not just the guys who are out in the streets with balaclavas. It's not a helpful word if you want to build peace. And that's another thing about leadership. You need to know your language. You need to know the appropriate language. Northern Ireland, North of Ireland. We need to be able to include everyone in our language. Can you imagine sitting down, trying to build the peace process and saying to the guys, you're the goodies, you're the terrorists, now how are we going to build the peace? So drop some words if they don't work for you. Terrorist doesn't work for me. Everybody's capable of being a terrorist. And surprisingly, I'm going back to West Belfast on Wednesday. One guy said to the British soldiers, so you have agreed that you were brutal in what you did in West Belfast. You attacked people in their homes. You destroyed their homes. Do you think you were terrorists? And do you know what the 2 British soldiers said? They said, yeah, I think we were. So for me, that was a really important step forward. We can all have a level playing field by realizing that none of us are angels. None of us are angels, but neither are we devils. But the work that I've been doing in the last 10 years is work that I want to do. How lucky am I? What I do is I design peace-building projects in different parts of the world and try to find people who will pay my mortgage while I'm doing it. That's really the story. The places I've worked, let me give you a list and then we'll go into these slides and I might be able to talk a little about them for a wee while. In Nepal have had a wild history. You know, I come from the British community. I just want to stop for a minute. I come from the British community. I was just saying to Morris before we started this session, whenever you find yourself in conflict, how many people here have been in conflict actually? Wow, there's some of you haven't. I live in a house, and 3 of my sons live in the house, and my wife lives in the house, and we have conflict every day. Every day. Usually 3 or 4 times. It starts, we have only 2 bathrooms, so it starts, who's getting into the bathroom, and that's the first conflict every day. Okay, so conflict is not unusual. We all experience conflict. All of us know conflict. Every day we have conflict. The problem is not conflict, because you know what? Is there anybody here supports Manchester United? Yeah. Anybody support Liverpool? What about Chelsea? Okay. So, we now have identified that there is a conflict in this big group here. There's a conflict because difference is conflict. But conflict isn't bad. What's bad is whenever we don't manage our conflict and we allow the conflict to become violence. That's what's bad. Our peace process is currently managing the conflict. We don't love each other yet on this island, but we're moving towards it, but it's going to be a couple of generations. And I'm really glad that some of you guys are going to be playing the leadership roles in all of this, because I've been playing it for 30 years, and sometimes, here's another lesson about leadership, sometimes being the leader is a very lonely furrow to plow. Sometimes you feel as if you're the only person there, because these guys are saying, don't be stupid. They actually tell you that you're being stupid. So you've got to be able to cope with the fact that people put you down. They tell you, you'll never do that. I'm really proud that I had 110 meetings of all of the political parties in Ireland, in Glencree, up until 2004, between 94 and 2004. These meetings would start on a Friday night, and they'd finish on a Sunday. And it wasn't just the structured conversations between these people that were important. It was the fact that they would have a beer or they'd have a coffee. And they'd ask each other questions like, how many children have you? What do they do? What's it like living in your place? They'd look in each other's eyes and they'd see the humanity. This was about rebuilding the humanity, that because they had dehumanized each other. We all know that's how soldiers work, whether they're paramilitary soldiers or full-time professional soldiers. That's how soldiers work. They dehumanize the enemy. If you don't dehumanize the enemy, you can't kill them. You're not a good soldier, actually, if you don't dehumanize the enemy. Our work was about rehumanizing. And as leaders, you are all going to have to do that in your own contexts. You're going to have to rehumanize. And quite often that means biting your tongue. You know what I mean by biting your tongue? Because you can clearly see right and wrong, but you can't. Your opinion is not important. Your opinion is irrelevant. Your action is important. Your action of getting them to agree to sit down with them is important. Is everybody with me so far? Yes. Have we a wee bit more time still? Yes. I think as leader in peace building, one of the things you need to do is to try to be humble. I'm still working on that. It's really difficult. But I'm trying to be humble, to appreciate how much other people have that you don't, and also to be affirmative. Don't put people down. Try to push them. Try to build them up. Let's face it, a lot of us get frustrated with politicians. A lot of us get frustrated with politicians. And we want to take them out and we want to shout at them and tell them that they're not doing a good job. But then they just ignore you. So, twice I put together statements in all of the daily newspapers in Ireland, and most of them in Britain, but all of the daily newspapers in Ireland gave at least a half page to this. It was a message to all politicians in Ireland and Britain. And it said, "We, the undersigned, commend you for your courage and determination in bringing the political peace process to this advanced stage." It didn't say you're not doing enough. It didn't say, "Hey, come on, get off your ass and go and do something." It said, "Well done for what you're doing so far." And then it went on to say, "We encourage you to continue." Now, the reality is, I was the leader that put this together. But for most of those groups, Ian White's just an ordinary guy walking in the city. What's the point in listening to him? So I went to the banks. I went to big business in Ireland. I went to the Eastern Electrical Ecclesiastical Insurance Office. I went to all those people. And I said, "Look, do me a favor, sign this statement." And they said, "Yeah, of course we will. Of course we will." This was listened to, and politicians still quite often remember the complimentary statements that were made in the paper to them that encouraged them to stay on the straight and narrow. There's an example of leadership that we're all capable of doing. And as I say, I'm lucky because I got the opportunity to do this stuff.